to Stanford?
So yes, as a 17-year-old, in the fall of 1891, he became one of the first students at Stanford University. It was a brand new college that just opened in California. He liked to say he was the first student because he was the first person to move into the dorms.
Wow.
Because he went a couple days early to take the entrance tests.
That is fantastic. I mean, who would know that, right?
Mm-hmm. And he had a fairly typical college career. He started out as an engineering major and then switched to geology. He wanted to become a mining engineer, and the geology professor persuaded him that that was a better major if that was his career aspiration. Photo of him as a student. And he went on, of course, subsequently to become a trustee of the university, and his fundraising over basically 50 years is what turned Stanford from a struggling small college into the world-class university that it is today.
That is awesome.
Herbert Hoover, they represented simply, inarguably, the right and decent thing to do.
I have no fears for the future of our country. It is bright with hope. I ask the help of Almighty God in this service to my country, to which you have called me.
All right, are we done with World War I now, and we're
Well,
into
we've
the
sort
Roaring
of skipped
20s?
ahead a little bit. We left out a couple of little episodes.
Yeah, you
People
gotta
will
come
have
see.
to come and see for themselves. So yeah, we're in the Roaring 20s, and after the war, Hoover was famous both in the U.S. and around the world, and he was appointed Secretary of Commerce by President Harding. And so in this gallery, we kind of highlight some of the amazing changes in U.S. culture during that period of time when he was Secretary of Commerce, including right here, this is the original television set.
Wow.
So in 1927, there's a photo of Hoover up there on the back wall. Hoover tested a first machine that could transmit pictures from one place to another. And it's not at all like what we now think of as television. More like a video phone in some ways, and it was mechanical. But these objects here were given to us then many years later. But they are the original television set.
Really interesting. Who knew it was in West Branch, Iowa?
Mm-hmm. So in this gallery, we've tried to highlight some of the many things that Hoover did as Secretary of Commerce. More broadly was standardization and simplification.
Yeah, I was just looking at that.
So as an engineer, he saw all kinds of opportunity for making business, industry, and life simpler and more economical. And so a lot of things that we now take for granted as standard, like nuts and bolts and lumber, milk bottles, bricks, he held conferences at the Commerce Department to figure out how to standardize them.
Wow.
And in fact, some of these things then went overseas. Like we've been contacted numerous times, folks in other countries, like New Zealand comes to mind. You know, why are our plumbing codes called Hoover codes? Well, because they were created here and then exported to other countries. Oh, hey, that's a great idea.
Yeah.
And it really changed the world.
And what he called his unending public chores, former President Hoover was anything but retired. For the last 25 years of his life, Hoover lived here in Suite 31A of New York's elegant Waldorf Towers.
That's the actual phone that was on Hoover's Oval Office desk in 1929. And there's two stories that connect to it. So, first of all, he was the first president that had a phone on his desk. They'd had phones in the White House since like the 1880s, but it was always like in a secretary's office or down the hall or something. But Hoover was efficiency-minded, and he said, I need a phone on my desk. So he got a phone on his desk. And then in December of 29, there was a fire in the West Wing. And this was part of what was salvaged. This was one of his aides when they were cleaning things up after the fire, they grabbed that phone. And he got a new phone when they rebuilt the West Wing. But that one was the original phone on his desk.
And then in June, Spencer is going to be bringing out some of the Laura Ingalls Wilder materials. So for all the Little House on the Prairie individuals, we'll have those out. So it's a monthly thing, and some of it, like Spencer has an affinity for Laura. so people find different parts of, you know, the collection that they enjoy, and they just kind of bring them out and just kind of share different things with people.
Okay, so you have something with Rose Wilder coming up, and is there a connection between Hoover and Laura Ingalls Wilder?
Well, so no, we don't actually have any events coming up, but we have a collection of papers here. They're actually the Rose Wilder Lane's papers. Rose Wilder Lane was the daughter of Laura Ingalls Wilder. And the connection is that Rose Wilder Lane, unlike her mother, was a professional writer. And she wrote many different kinds of things over her lifetime. But as a young woman in 1920, needing some income, she was hired to write a campaign biography for Herbert Hoover. The first time that he was sort of thinking of running for president in 1920, and one of his friends hired her to write a campaign biography. And Hoover actually didn't like it. He didn't know about it until it was actually going on, and he did meet with Rose once during the project, but she was more of a fiction writer than a biographical writer, and so she kind of dramatized his life, and she added in dialogue and things, and he hated it. But the other half of that then was that he had actually already hired somebody to write his campaign biography.
Sure.
He hired a friend of his, or asked a friend of his to do it for him. His name was Vernon Kellogg, and he was a professor of entomology, bugs, at Stanford University, and he wrote in a much drier and much more buttoned up way, and Hoover liked that one much better.
Sure, yeah.
But the biography project led to Rose and Hoover staying in contact. They weren't friends, they weren't even, very well acquainted, but over the years they would check in for various things. When Rose wrote an important book in 1943, she went and talked to Hoover about it, got his input, things like that. And so years later, when we were starting to build our collections here, Herbert Hoover's papers alone don't tell his life story, right? We needed things around him. So we have about 300 different collections here that aren't named Herbert Hoover. And so we contacted Roger Lee McBride, who was the man who had inherited Rose's papers after she died.
Okay.
This was the 1970s. And one thing led to another, and he decided just to donate the whole collection here.
Wow.
So it's primarily Rose's professional papers. It's all of her manuscripts for the many different things that she wrote, books and articles and fiction and nonfiction. It's her diaries and notes, her personal letters to friends and colleagues and other folks that she was acquainted with. But then there's about 8,000 pages that have to do with her mother's books, because she edited her mother's books. So her mother, Laura Ingalls Wilder, when she was writing the novels, would write her stories in longhand in these dime store tablets and give them to Rose. And then Rose would type them and edit them and send them in to the publisher.
How fantastic.
And the published versions of the books, very charming, very well crafted, because Rose did a fantastic job of taking her mother's kind of raw ideas and polishing them. And you can really see the difference if you read the last published book, which is called The First 4 Years, was actually published after both Rose and Laura were dead. And it was Laura's final memoir of her young life. It was the first 4 years of her married life. And it was published basically unedited. And so you can kind of see Laura's raw style in that book. And the other books in the series, much more polished, because they went through Rose's typewriter.
I loved those books when I was young. Now I might have to get them back out.
Yeah.
I don't want to give too much away, because we want people to come and see it for themselves
Yep.
and donate. But I appreciate learning all of this stuff, because really I didn't have much of a history of Hoover before we came.
Well, he led a really remarkable life. I mean, like any president, it's his years in the White House that get the most attention, but that was 4 out of 90 years, and he really did an awful lot of remarkable things before and after his presidency.